They made him stand aside, not because his ticket was wrong, not because he broke any rule, but because he was black and dared to step into first class. That's how this story starts. Not with a handshake, not with a welcome, but with a silent judgment, a raised eyebrow, and a hand held out like a stop sign. He didn't yell. He didn't fight back. He just handed over his ticket and watched the man behind him, white, well-dressed, and smiling, breeze right past without a second glance. What they didn't know was that the boy they humiliated in front of a dozen strangers wasn't just another passenger. But not yet. You'll find out soon enough. First, let's go back to that moment. That second when the balance tipped, when the air grew thick with the kind of tension you don't forget. What happens when quiet dignity meets loud ignorance at 35,000 feet? What happens when the one person they tried to erase turns out to be the one holding their future in his hands? This isn't just a story about a flight. It's a story about power, perception, and what happens when truth rises where it's least expected. Think you know what comes next? You don't. Stick around. Watch closely. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? And what do you think is really going on here? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts below. You're going to want to see how this one ends. Jalen Moore walked through the sliding glass doors of Terminal just after sunrise, his suitcase trailing behind him in smooth rhythm across the polished airport tiles. He wore a charcoal hoodie, slim dark jeans, and a calm, clean expression that betrayed neither tension nor arrogance. His headphones were looped loosely around his neck, and in his right hand, he carried a flat black leather portfolio, scuffed on the corners, the kind designers favored when they didn't need to impress, when they already knew what they were worth. He headed straight toward the first-class security lane, guided by the large golden letters that read Priority and Premium Access. As he approached, a TSA agent, tall, broad, pale-skinned with a buzz cut and mirror sunglasses, stepped directly into his path and raised a hand. Not in greeting, just a stop sign, wordless and deliberate. Jalen halted, blinking once in surprise, and slowly reached into his hoodie pocket to produce his boarding pass. "Boarding pass?" he asked, holding the screen of his phone outward. The officer didn't take it. He looked Jalen over from head to toe, then flicked his eyes behind him and waved forward the next passenger, a middle-aged white man in a navy suit, who glided past with a courteous smile and a silver Rimowa carry-on. Jalen remained standing. The TSA agent finally took his phone with 2 fingers, stared at the screen as if it were counterfeit, then gave a small nod and returned it like it was something mildly contaminated. "Go ahead," he said without expression. Jalen exhaled through his nose and walked through the barrier. Inside, the terminal was alive with energy. Announcements overhead, the smell of espresso, the shuffle of luggage wheels. But everything felt more sterile than usual. As he neared the check-in desk for Gate 27, the same pattern continued. The gate attendant looked up from her monitor, her smile flatlining the moment she saw him. Her voice was tight. "Name?" "Jalen Moore," he answered, presenting both his ID and phone again. She studied them longer than necessary, then typed for an uncomfortably long stretch without speaking. Behind him, a well-dressed woman in a beige trench coat whispered something to her husband, then clicked her tongue in annoyance. Jalen said nothing. Finally, the attendant's eyes flicked to him again. "All right. First class. 2, aboard when called." No apology, no eye contact, no smile. Jalen nodded and stepped aside. When boarding was called 10 minutes later, he lined up with the other first-class passengers. He was the youngest. He was the only one not wearing a blazer or heels or Rolex. And he was the only one whose name was double-checked. Again, as he entered the jet bridge, the hum of the aircraft pulsed ahead of him. The first-class cabin was sleek, warm-toned, all soft gold lighting and leather seats that looked sculpted instead of assembled. Jalen found 2A, stowed his carry-on carefully, and lowered himself into the seat. Across the aisle, a woman with pearl earrings and a silk scarf glanced at him once, then again, her lips pressing together like she'd just tasted something bitter. A flight attendant walked the row with a tray of champagne flutes. She skipped him. Twice. Jalen didn't speak. He pulled out his tablet and opened a design mock-up. On screen, a stylized phoenix curved upward in a modern golden arc, overlaying deep blue geometric accents. The hum of boarding announcements echoed overhead, the surrounding passengers shifting their weight with calm impatience, none of them paying him much attention, until they did. A flight agent with cropped gray hair stepped out from behind the counter, scanned the line once, then walked directly toward him, ignoring the two businessmen ahead and stopping just short of his space. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" she asked, her tone courteous on the surface, but carrying a thread of suspicion. Jalen raised an eyebrow, but complied, handing over his phone wordlessly. She took it, glanced quickly, then frowned, as if the information still didn't add up. "One moment," she said, and gestured for him to step aside. "We're just verifying something." Before he could speak, another passenger, a tall man in a cream coat, walked past and was waved through without pause. Jalen's stomach tightened slightly, but his face remained unreadable. The agent stepped away to consult a second staff member near the counter. They leaned in, whispering, occasionally glancing back at him, and Jalen stood there, feeling the eyes begin to gather. Passengers in line were now aware that he wasn't moving forward like the rest, that something about him warranted extra attention. A soft voice from behind him asked, "Problem?" Jalen didn't turn around, didn't answer. He just focused on his breath, even, controlled. Eventually, the woman returned, still holding his phone. She handed it back, then gave a half-hearted nod toward the jet bridge, not offering an apology, not even meeting his eyes. He walked forward, his steps measured. But the damage was done. Eyes followed. Whispers stirred. When he arrived at the boarding gate, the same gate agent from earlier looked up and, without checking anything, extended an arm sideways. "I'm going to ask you to wait over here for a moment." Jalen's brows furrowed. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" The woman hesitated, then muttered, "We're just reviewing seat assignments." Standard procedure. Behind him, another passenger, a blonde teenager in branded sneakers, walked through with a bored nod, his music still playing through his headphones. Jalen stood off to the side, trying to suppress the heat crawling up his neck. After a few minutes, yet another staffer approached. She looked young, nervous, unsure of the situation, but firm in her delivery. "Where's your guardian, kid? This area's for professionals." Jalen didn't answer right away. He stared at her, registering every detail. The clipboard clutched her chest, the fake confidence in her voice, the assumption in her tone that someone like him, young, black, alone, couldn't possibly have earned a seat in first class on his own. He cleared his throat. "I'm traveling alone, and I'm 17. My ticket says 2A, and it's first class. Want to see my ID again?" She blinked, caught off guard, then quickly shook her head. "No, that won't be necessary. You can proceed." But her voice was brittle now, like a thin shell trying to hold shape under the weight of something heavier. Jalen walked onto the plane, no longer feeling the quiet power he'd carried before. Now he carried something different, a storm, quiet and internal, laced with restraint. As he moved down the first-class aisle again, he noticed one of the flight attendants whispering to another, both glancing in his direction, as if his presence alone demanded explanation. The second attendant gave a faint shrug, then turned away. Jalen reached his seat, sat down, opened his tablet, pretended none of it mattered. But his heart was louder than the engines outside. He could still feel the judgment in every sideways glance, every forced smile, every nonverbal signal telling him he didn't belong. Not here, not in this cabin, not with them. He tapped the screen, zoomed in on his design again, and stared at the clean gold lines of the logo he'd spent 3 months perfecting. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was literally surrounded by the branding he'd created, on pillows, on the ticket stub, on the stitched leather headrest beside him. And yet they questioned his right to sit in the space that bore his mark. A flight attendant, tall and tight-lipped, glanced down as she walked by, then stopped mid-stride, leaned closer, and narrowed her eyes at the screen. Jalen noticed her pause and turned his head slightly, sensing her scrutiny. She tilted her head. "You trying to hack the plane, kid?" Her voice was sharp, loud enough for 2 nearby passengers to hear and turn toward them with raised brows. Jalen stared at her, unblinking. "Excuse me," he said, confusion and offense both stitched into his voice. The attendant didn't smile. She folded her arms and stared harder at the laptop, as if the motion graphics and UI wireframes were lines of malicious code. "That doesn't look like homework," she added, the tone now bordering on accusation. Jalen closed the laptop slowly. "It's design work," he said evenly, forcing his voice to stay level. "I'm a branding consultant." She looked unconvinced. "Well, we've had incidents before. Just letting you know, we monitor unusual activity." With that, she walked off, leaving behind a silence thicker than cabin air. Jalen looked around. The couple across the aisle was watching him with expressions that teetered between curiosity and discomfort. One of them shifted in their seat, pulling their bag closer. A minute passed. Then another flight attendant appeared, different uniform, stockier build, and approached Jalen with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Moore." Jalen nodded cautiously. "Yes." The attendant tapped a tablet. "There's been a seating issue. Your seat's been double assigned. We're going to need to relocate you." Jalen blinked. "Relocate me? I boarded almost an hour ago. There was no issue until now." The man shrugged, still smiling that flat, mechanical smile. "I understand. It's just a system error. Happens sometimes." Jalen's voice was quiet but firm. "And the other person assigned to 2A?" The attendant hesitated. "Already seated. There's a spot open near the rear galley. I can help you move your things." Jalen sat there for a moment, lips parted slightly in disbelief. He could feel his heartbeat in his neck. "That's row 31, he said, "next to the restroom." The attendant didn't respond, just nodded politely. "If you'll come with me." Jalen stood slowly, his movements deliberate, picking up his backpack and the same portfolio that had been mocked by security hours earlier. As he turned, he saw the same white-haired man who'd walked past him at security glance up from his whiskey. Their eyes met. The man smirked, then looked away. Jalen walked the length of the plane, passing rows of passengers, some watching him openly, others pretending not to. When he reached his new seat, the space was cramped, the lighting harsher, and the air less filtered. He sat down, slid his bag under the seat, and stared at the seat back in front of him for a long time. From one of the overhead speakers, a soft jazz instrumental looped. His tablet buzzed with a notification, new message from the agency director. "Looking forward to next week's keynote. The city execs are impressed. They want to highlight you during the press release." Jalen didn't reply. He just turned off the screen and stared ahead, jaw clenched. His work was literally flying above the clouds, stitched into the very branding of this aircraft, while he sat here at the back, beside a rattling service cart and a faint odor of bleach. He had been profiled, doubted, and now displaced, all because of how he looked. The insult wasn't in words. The hum of the engines offered no comfort. It only amplified the pressure building behind his ribs. His fingers hovered over his tablet for a moment, then retreated. He was too aware of every eye, too aware of how his presence was now a spectacle. Behind him, the rear galley clattered as flight attendants shuffled equipment and whispered behind drawn curtains. In front of him, the aisle pulsed with the quiet movements of people settling into mid-flight routines. Someone 2 rows up discreetly held up their phone, angling the camera toward Jalen. The lens trembled slightly, as if the person filming was both nervous and angry, capturing the moment a black teenager, dressed cleanly and calmly, had been removed from first class without explanation. But before the recording could go longer than 10 seconds, a flight attendant appeared like a shadow and leaned in. "Sir," she said to the man holding the phone, her voice soft but sharp, "you might want to stay out of this if you want to keep flying with us." The man hesitated, clearly caught off guard, then slowly lowered the phone. She didn't thank him. She just walked away. Jalen saw it all, said nothing. His jaw clenched, but his face remained still, carved in quiet endurance. He glanced down at the tablet again, opened the draft of the presentation he was scheduled to deliver next week, and added a single bullet point under brand narrative integration. Invisibility is not neutrality. The irony made his stomach turn. He closed the file. After another 15 minutes of silence and contained rage, Jalen opened his email app, selected a contact labeled Gabe Ops ATL HQ, and began typing. It was brief. Need escalation. Urgent. Situation on Flight 781. Respond ASAP. He hit send. Seconds later, his phone lit up. Incoming call. He put in one AirPod and answered. Jalen. The voice on the other end said, smooth and familiar, but carrying a bite of confusion. Where are you right now? Jalen's response was clipped. Row 31. Moved from first without reason. You still know anyone up front? The voice paused, clearly unsettled. Give me a second. The line went silent. Jalen waited, watching the curtain at the front of the economy cabin ripple as someone passed through. 5 minutes later, another call came in. This time from someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. Marcus Reed, ATL Terminal Director. Jalen stared at the name before answering. The voice on the line was deep, rehearsed, dismissive. Jalen Moore. Still drawing pretty pictures, huh? The tone was smug. Jalen didn't rise to it. I designed your rebrand. Remember that before you say anything else. Marcus chuckled. You designed one pitch. Don't get ahead of yourself. Jalen's voice lowered. I didn't call for compliments. I called because your staff just removed me from first without cause. You think that's smart? This whole rollout's under my name. Silence. Then a slow exhale. You're overreacting, Marcus said finally. I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. I'll check in. Jalen almost laughed. Almost. But he didn't. He just ended the call without another word and put his phone into airplane mode. Outside the window, clouds passed in long white ribbons. Above them, the sky was a pure blue, too calm for what he was feeling. He wasn't angry for being moved. He wasn't even angry about the condescension. He was angry because he had warned them. He had told them to change their culture, to reconsider the way their people treated certain passengers. He had offered training modules, even free branding workshops around equity. As the flight crew passed, the same flight attendant who had earlier questioned his work glanced down at his bag, now tucked under the seat in front of him. Her eyes narrowed, and she stopped. Sir, can you please remove your bag? We're conducting a random secondary check, she said. Her voice was flat, overly formal, wrapped in authority like it needed armor. Jalen looked up, expression blank. It's been cleared already, he replied. TSA inspected it before I boarded. She didn't budge. This is a separate procedure. We'll need to take it to the galley for manual review. Passengers around them turned their heads, some openly staring, others pretending to be engrossed in their books or screens. Jalen hesitated, then slowly bent down and unzipped the side of the bag. Do you want me to bring it, or are you taking it? The attendant held out her hands. We'll take it. She grabbed the bag and turned sharply, her coworker following. Jalen sat there, suddenly aware of the vulnerability of not having it within reach. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. No word, no explanation. Finally, he saw one of them return, alone, carrying the bag in both hands, now unzipped and slightly deformed, as if someone had stuffed it back together hastily, without care. The flap hung open slightly. One of the straps was half ripped. As she set the bag down, a folded piece of high-weight stock paper slid out, landing near Jalen's foot. He recognized it instantly. It was the primary print layout of the terminal welcome banner, his signature design. A curved blue and gold minimalist skyline with ATL integrated into the negative space. It had taken him days to perfect. Now, it lay on the floor like litter. The attendant made no move to pick it up. Jalen leaned down, gathered it carefully, checked for tears. A corner had been creased, hard. He pressed it flat against his thigh, jaw tight. You went through this, he asked, not loudly, but with unmistakable weight. The woman crossed her arms. We had reason to believe the contents were suspicious. Jalen stared at her, then slowly reached into the bag and pulled out another document, a signed license agreement with the agency that commissioned the entire campaign. He held it up for her to see, letting the gold seal catch the cabin light. This logo is on your seat cushions, he said, keeping his voice even. You might want to learn what it looks like. Her eyes flicked to the paper, but her expression didn't change. Then another voice joined from a few seats back. A different crew member, younger, bolder, muttered just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You sure you didn't steal this stuff?" Jalen turned his head sharply. "What did you say?" The man stepped forward slightly, feigning casual authority. "I'm just saying. I've seen people pull graphics off Google, slap a fake signature on it, and claim it's theirs. Happens more than you think." Jalen stood, slowly, deliberately. "And people like you don't think twice about saying that to me, do you?" The cabin grew still. The man's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, people like me?" Jalen didn't answer. He didn't have to. The insinuation was already in the air, thick and sharp like the recycled oxygen they were all breathing. Another flight attendant stepped in quickly, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. "Let's not escalate," she said under her breath. But it was too late. Passengers were now whispering. Some were filming. A woman 2 rows up muttered, "This is ridiculous," while another man leaned forward, squinting at Jalen's documents with confused interest. Jalen lowered himself back into his seat, carefully placed the creased layout back into his bag, and zipped it shut with slow precision. His hands trembled, but his expression stayed calm, controlled, measured. The damage was done, but the response was still his. Across the aisle, a teenager stared at him. Jalen met his eyes briefly. He had spent the last 20 minutes trying to regulate his breathing, trying not to think about the logo that had landed face down on the dirty floor, the way they had picked through his work like it was contraband, the way they had spoken about him like he couldn't possibly be the owner of anything worth defending. He reached into his bag, pulled out one of the remaining unbent print copies, and gently flattened it across the tray table. The colors were slightly faded now under the cheap lighting of the economy cabin, but the lines still carried the precision, the vision, the story of a brand meant to signal rebirth. ATL rising into a new era. A flight attendant walking by slowed down, peered over his shoulder, then chuckled under her breath. "Still at it, huh?" she said, voice low but pointed. "You must really think you're somebody." Jalen didn't even look at her. "I am," he said, calm but heavy. "I designed this logo. I led the campaign." She snorted. "Sure you did. And I'm the CEO of Apple." Her words lingered like the bitter aftertaste of spoiled wine. She kept walking, but her laughter didn't stop. A few seats ahead, someone whispered, and someone else laughed louder. Jalen didn't respond. He didn't move. He just looked back down at the design, now smudged slightly at the corner from where a security tag had dragged across it earlier. His throat felt dry. His chest was tight. And still, he refused to flinch. He reached for his water, but the bottle was missing from the tray. The cart had passed him twice already, without stopping. He knew better than to ask again. Instead, he took out his stylus and began to sketch, revising the typography on the ATL curve, sharpening the edge of the Phoenix's wing, not because it needed fixing, but because focusing on it was the only thing that kept him steady. 2 rows back, a boy about 10 years old leaned forward, curious. He was holding a smartphone with a crack case, and had been sneakily recording snippets of the flight ever since the incident near the galley. Now he pointed the phone at Jalen's backpack, where a stitched version of the logo was embedded in the fabric, a limited edition, unreleased prototype from the official rollout. "Mom," the boy whispered, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "Look, that's the airport logo. The new one, the one on the banners." His mother barely glanced. Then her face changed. She reached down, took the phone from his hand, and hissed, "Delete that. Don't be rude." But the boy tried to explain, but she cut him off. "Delete it now. Don't say things like that. People are watching." Her eyes darted toward Jalen, then back to her phone. The boy stared at her, confused. His excitement drained from his face like someone had popped a balloon. Jalen had heard it. All of it. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge them, but a slow, steady ache tightened in his chest. The truth had surfaced for a moment, recognized by a child, and then immediately buried again, as if it were dangerous to acknowledge. He stared down at the portfolio lying across his knees. He wanted to shout, to scream, to force them all to see. After everything, the stares, the mockery, the invasive search, he had chosen to say nothing. not because he lacked the words, but because he knew the power of silence when paired with precision. But now, as he sat there beneath the cold, flickering light of row 31C, something in him shifted. Not rage, not desperation, something cleaner, a sense of timing. He reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone, flipping off airplane mode. The connection re-established immediately, notifications buzzing in like bees in a jar. One stood out, a missed call from Damon Ellis, CEO of Luminaire Group, the primary airline stakeholder in the new Atlanta terminal rollout. Jalen tapped the contact, hit video call, and waited, his expression unreadable. The screen lit up, then steadied. Damon's face appeared, clean-shaven, serious, his background a glass-walled boardroom with branding materials pinned behind him. "Jalen," Damon said immediately, voice brisk but warm. "Are you okay? We just got a message from Gabe." "What's happening?" Jalen didn't raise his voice. "They moved me to the back, tore through my bag, laughed in my face." Damon's jaw locked. "You're in coach. Row 31, next to the lavatory," Jalen replied, tilting the camera briefly toward the hallway of economy class. Damon's face tightened. "Jesus." Then louder, to someone off-screen, "Get me towercom. Now. I want to speak to whoever's running this flight." Before Damon could say more, another flight attendant appeared at the curtain near first class. This one wore a gold-trimmed epaulette, older than the others, eyes sharp behind wireframe glasses. He had entered to follow up on an earlier staff report, unusual passenger behavior, but paused mid-step when his eyes caught the edge of Jalen's backpack. His gaze locked on the logo stitched into the fabric. Something about it froze him. He moved closer, his brow furrowed. Then he squinted. The logo, stylized, modern, and subtly unique, was unmistakable. It wasn't the generic version used in promotional materials. This was the alpha design, the confidential, hand-approved version still embargoed under contract. "Where did you get this?" he asked, voice low, urgent. Jalen glanced up. "I made it." The man stiffened. "I'm sorry." Jalen didn't flinch. He turned the tablet toward the man, tapped the screen, and opened the protected folder. The designs bloomed across the display, mock-ups, brand decks, interface renders, all signed in the metadata with his full name and designer credentials. "I'm the lead on the ATL rebrand," he said. "The logo, the campaign, the launch event. All of it. It's mine." The attendant stared at the screen, blinking once. Then again. His expression changed slowly. First confusion, then realization, then shame. Passengers nearby had begun to take notice. A man leaned across the aisle. "Wait, is that the airport logo?" A teenager pulled out her phone. "I saw this on the news yesterday. Isn't the design revealed tonight?" The senior attendant took a step back, muttering something under his breath. "They didn't say the designer would be on board." Jalen stood calmly and held the phone higher so Damon's face could be seen clearly. "Want to repeat that to my boss," he said. The attendant's mouth opened, then closed again. On screen, Damon's voice cut in like a blade. "Is this the man who's been harassed for the last 2 hours?" The attendant's cheeks flushed. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding. There always is," Damon replied coldly. "Until it ends up on the front page." At that moment, 2 other staff members arrived from first class, drawn by the sudden tension in the aisle. One of them, a woman who had walked past Jalen earlier without offering water, looked at the screen, saw Damon's face, and paled. "That's," she whispered to the other, who nodded slowly. Jalen turned the screen back toward himself, his voice as steady as stone. "Tell your captain I'd like to return to my assigned seat." The whispering grew louder behind him, conversations rising and falling in startled waves, passengers murmuring questions to one another, their eyes darting from the tablet in his hand to the stitched logo on his bag, to the senior attendant who now trailed behind him with the expression of someone who had just realized they'd made a monumental mistake. When Jalen reached his original seat, 2A, no one stopped him this time. He placed his bag carefully in the overhead bin, slid into the plush leather seat, and adjusted the tray table with a calm that carried weight. The other first-class passengers didn't speak, but their silence was no longer one of dismissal. It was deference now, coated in uncertainty. Moments later, A new announcement crackled over the intercom. It was the captain. His voice, usually crisp and practiced, now held a tremor of force control. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have a special guest on board today, Mr. Jalen Moore, lead designer of the Atlanta Global Terminal Rebrand Project. We'd like to recognize him for his incredible work and innovation. For those attending the press event upon landing, you'll get to see the full campaign later this evening. A beat of stunned silence followed, then scattered applause, some polite, some enthusiastic, many unsure. But it didn't matter. The narrative had changed. Across the aisle, the pearl-clad woman who had glared at Jalen earlier now offered a tight, awkward smile. He didn't return it. At the front of the cabin, a woman in a blue blazer with a Luminaire press badge stepped out from the jump seat and approached with a smartphone in hand. "Mr. Moore," she said gently, "we weren't expecting you to arrive before the media shuttle. May I?" She motioned toward the phone. Jalen gave a small nod. She snapped a quick photo, stepped back, and immediately began typing. Less than 5 minutes later, as the plane cruised 33,000 feet above sea level, Jalen's name began trending across social media. ATL's rebrand mastermind just got profiled mid-flight. Literally. Teen genius removed from first class. Guess who designed the cabin interior? They tried to humiliate him. Turns out he owns the sky. Across the terminal back in Atlanta, reporters scrambled to update their scripts. Cameras redirected. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants regrouped in the galley, whispering urgently. The young male attendant who had accused Jalen of stealing stood frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the aisle as if watching a ghost return. The one who had laughed at him earlier now avoided his gaze entirely. The weight of recognition had begun to settle in. Then came the moment that sealed it. A woman too rose behind Jalen, early 30s, caramel-skinned, holding a press tablet, leaned into the aisle and softly said, "I know who you are." Jalen turned, uncertain whether it was another attempt at dismissal. But her expression was different, genuine, even reverent. "You're the one who turned down Google, right?" she asked. "Said you wanted to build a visual language for your people instead." Jalen hesitated, then gave the smallest nod. Her eyes gleamed. "Respect," she said. "Real respect." With that, she returned to her tablet, clearly already drafting a story. Another passenger murmured something about scholarships and speaking tours. Someone else whispered about TEDx. As the cabin settled, flight attendants moved with unnatural stiffness, no longer drifting through the aisles with authority, now weighed down by the realization that everything they had done, every look, every word, every decision, had been witnessed, recorded, and most importantly, understood in context. Back in the rear section, the passenger who had tried to record earlier, the one who had been threatened by crew, had already uploaded his full video to social media. The post had gone viral within minutes, not just because of what it showed, but because of who it involved. Jalen Moore was not a name people forgot once they knew it. Within 30 minutes, Luminaire's corporate comms received the first wave of press inquiries. Not about the brand launch, not about the billion-dollar rollout, but about the mid-flight incident. An emergency call was placed directly to the captain from ground control, instructing him to flag the current flight for internal investigation and to submit full crew logs and passenger manifests for review. The flight crew knew immediately that something had changed. They avoided Jalen's row altogether now, and even passengers who had earlier laughed at or dismissed him now sat stiffly in their seats, eyes averted, as if in silent apology. But it wasn't enough, not yet. As the plane began its descent into Atlanta, the tension only grew. By the time they landed, 2 airline representatives were already waiting at the gate, along with a member of the airport's internal ethics compliance team and an HR executive from the parent company. The flight attendants were instructed to remain on board after passengers disembarked. Jalen was asked, politely this time, if he would be willing to speak to company officials upon arrival. He agreed, but only after the last passenger had exited. When the plane emptied, Jalen rose, collected his bag, and walked calmly toward the front where a private section had been cleared for the conversation. The senior executive, pressed suit, tired eyes, trembling hands, extended his hand first. Jalen didn't take it. Instead, he placed his credentials, a printed copy of the brand contract, and the photo of his damaged portfolio on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke clearly. The executive didn't argue. He simply nodded, swallowed hard, and said, "This isn't the first time we've heard complaints. But it's the first time we can't look away." Within the hour, Luminaire issued a public statement acknowledging the incident, confirming that multiple crew members on Flight 781 had been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. The statement used terms like deep concern, regrettable conduct, and commitment to accountability. But Jalen knew the real change wouldn't come from words. It would come from exposure. As pressure mounted, employees from within the airline began submitting reports anonymously to an internal portal opened by the ethics office. Many of the claims detailed patterns of racial profiling, dismissive conduct, and internal complaints that had gone unanswered for years. One whistleblower, a black flight attendant who had resigned 2 months earlier, posted her resignation letter publicly, citing a culture of condescension wrapped in professionalism. The momentum shifted rapidly. News outlets picked up the story within hours. What began as a branding trip became a case study in systemic accountability. By nightfall, 3 supervisors across 3 regional hubs had been suspended. The security chief who had blocked Jalen at the first-class gate was placed on indefinite leave. And the terminal manager, Marcus Reed, the same man who had belittled Jalen over the phone mid-flight, was officially removed from his position after emails surfaced showing he had ignored multiple internal warnings about biased behavior from his staff. Jalen watched it all unfold from his hotel suite overlooking downtown Atlanta. The days following the incident unfolded like a ripple effect, quiet at first, then far-reaching. Jalen didn't return to the spotlight, didn't flood interviews or ride the media wave. Instead, he went back to work, back to his downtown studio in Atlanta, a converted warehouse space filled with light, raw materials, and silence where creativity had room to breathe. The team gave him space. No one mentioned the flight unless he brought it up. But the world hadn't forgotten. The video of the confrontation now had over 23 million views. His name had been cited in think pieces on race, design, and generational power. But Jalen didn't respond to any of it, not with tweets, not with outrage. He waited. Then, 2 weeks after the landing, a man showed up at the studio door, holding a crumpled baseball cap in one hand and a folded envelope in the other. Jalen recognized him instantly. It was the TSA officer from the terminal, the one who had blocked his entry into the first-class line, the one who hadn't said a word, just raised a hand like Jalen's presence was already a problem. Now, that same man stood with shoulders lowered, eyes sunken, voice soft. "I came to apologize," he said. "Not because the cameras caught it. Because you made me see it. I didn't know who you were. But that's the problem, isn't it?" Jalen didn't speak for a long moment. He studied the man, not for excuses, but for sincerity. Then he stepped aside and opened the door wider. "We're starting a design literacy program next month," he said calmly, "for public sector workers. It's not just about logos, it's about perception. Want in?" The man's eyes widened. He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I do." And just like that, a new thread was woven. Over the next 3 months, the studio's community program grew faster than expected. It started with a handful of students, public employees, customer service staff, a few ex-security guards, and then expanded to include airline workers, school administrators, and transit officials from across the state. Jalen didn't teach every session himself, but he opened each one. He told his story not as a lecture, but as a mirror, reflecting the harm that quiet bias could do, and the quiet power required to undo it. Some familiar faces appeared. The flight attendant who had questioned whether he belonged. The crew member who had accused him of stealing his own work. Even the supervisor from the gate who had once dismissed his boarding pass now sat in the back row, scribbling notes with silent urgency. No one was forced to be there. They had signed up voluntarily, each of them carrying a different burden, a different reason to understand what they hadn't before. At the end of the 6-week course, they stood on the rooftop of the studio under string lights and open sky, each person holding a certificate embossed with Jalen's signature. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about transformation. One of them, a mid-level manager with graying hair and tired eyes, stepped forward to give a short speech. "I judged someone based on everything except what mattered," he said. "And now, thanks to him, I see what real leadership looks like. Respect isn't earned through status. It's proven through character." Applause followed. Not thunderous, but real. Jalen stood at the edge of the group, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He wasn't smiling for the cameras. He wasn't doing it for the headlines. He was doing it because this was the work. Not just building brands, but rebuilding the lens through which people saw each other. As the crowd began to thin, one of the younger trainees, a former intern turned junior designer, walked up to him. "When people look at that ATL logo," she said, "they think of a city, a terminal, a future. But now they'll also think of you, of how it started." Jalen nodded, and how it didn't end there. The city lights twinkled behind him, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a small, full breath. The sky above him was clear, unapologetic, wide open. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful narratives like this one. What part of the story hit you the hardest? Was it the moment of injustice, the quiet strength, or the final redemption? And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to see how far this story travels. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts.